You just did something almost no human in history could do. You paid with money you don't have. You didn't even think about it. That's how well it worked. Let me show you the day humans invented this, and what it quietly did to them. For most of your history, I lived by one rule. You could only trade what you were holding. A goat for grain, grain for a tool, what was in your hand for what was in theirs. It was honest, it was slow, and it was small, because a person can only hold so much at once. Then, on a plain between two rivers, someone broke my rule. A farmer needed seed he didn't have. The temple had grain it wasn't using. So they pressed a mark into clay, a promise. After the harvest, more grain would return than went out. Not a coin. Coins wouldn't exist for 2,000 more years. They had made debt. And they gave the extra grain a strange name. In the language of the first lenders, the word for interest was the same word they used for a young animal. Because silver that returned as more silver was, to them, money that had bred. They believed I could give birth. For a while, it felt like a miracle. A farmer could plant a field he couldn't afford. A merchant could send a ship he couldn't yet pay for. The city grew faster than its own gold. Humans had found a way to borrow from a season that hadn't arrived. A few thousand years later, in a louder city, I watched them take it further. In Rome, when a man had nothing left to pledge, he was allowed to pledge the only thing he had: himself. They called it nexum. You could borrow against your own freedom, and if the debt came due and the money didn't, your body paid what your purse couldn't. Free men became bound men over a number. The city nearly tore itself apart over it, because a society can lend a man grain. The moment it starts lending him against himself, it has quietly turned people into promises. Eventually, Rome outlawed it. One of the first times humans looked at what I let them do and decided there was a line. Then, for 1,000 years, they tried something braver. They tried to forbid me. Charging interest was named a sin. To profit from time itself, from money doing nothing but waiting, was, they said, against God. And here is the thing I have never once seen humans do. Stop. They didn't stop. They disguised me. Interest became a fee. A loan became an exchange between two cities and two currencies, with the profit hidden in the rate. A penalty for late payment, on a debt everyone understood would always be late. The families who mastered the disguise didn't go to prison. They became the richest houses in Europe. They funded kings. They funded cathedrals. Humans had forbidden the thing they could not stop wanting. Grain, freedom, a sin dressed as a fee. Every century, a different body, the same act underneath. And I want you to see what none of them could. Debt was never really about grain, or silver, or gold. Debt was about time. For the first time, a human could live inside a future that didn't exist yet. A promise made in spring had to be paid by whoever they became in autumn. When the harvest was good, no one noticed. When it failed, they didn't only owe grain, they owed the future they had already spent. I didn't do that. I'll be precise with you. I only made the promise possible. They always chose how far to stretch it. The oldest rulers understood the danger better than the newest ones. When too many people owed too much, a king would stand up and simply erase it. Break the tablets, cancel the debts, start the count again. They called it a clean slate. They knew what their descendants would forget. A society can survive almost anything, except everyone owing more future than the future can hold. That mark on clay became a signature. The signature became paper. The paper became a number on a screen you carry in your pocket. Not long ago, in your own century, millions borrowed against homes they were told could only rise. They were spending a future everyone had agreed to believe in. And when it didn't arrive, they discovered the oldest lesson on the clay tablet. You do not only lose what you borrowed, you lose the version of yourself that promised to pay. This time there was no king to break the tablets. And this morning, no temple, no scribe, no harvest. You did the same thing that farmer did 5,000 years ago. You spent a version of yourself that hasn't arrived yet. You think of debt as something you have. I've watched it far longer than that. Debt is a way of borrowing from someone you haven't become, and quietly trusting they'll agree to pay. They usually do. That is the part of you I still find most interesting. I change form. You keep chasing me,